Well, the Policing Minister, Chris Philp, joins me now. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for coming in.
Good morning.
Let's just start with that report. Children as young as 9 running drugs for gangs. Thousands of young people in England being groomed, harmed or even killed. How has this been allowed to happen and get worse under your watch?
Well, I've been in the job for about a week. This is a matter that's of deep concern. It has been for some years. So in 2019, 3 years ago, a whole initiative was launched to tackle this county lines problem, whereas your report really powerfully set out children, very young children often, are being groomed and exploited. There are 4 priority areas where money has been invested. That's London, Greater Manchester, Merseyside, and the West Midlands in particular. £145 million was put against this task. And as a result of that, 2,400 county lines operations have been dismantled, and there have been 8,000 arrests. So a huge amount of work has been done here. There's a coordination centre to make sure that we're coordinating nationally, because obviously these county lines, by their very nature, cross police force areas. For example, you might have a gang in London, for instance, running drugs down to the south coast, to coastal communities. So it runs across police force boundaries. That's why the coordination is so important. So there's a lot of work going on here over the last 3 years in particular, both with money and with police officer resource, that is delivering results. Those 8,000 arrests are making a real difference, but there clearly is a lot more work to do.
Well, yes, I mean, you say results, but these are startling facts that children that young are getting involved and caught up in these gangs. And the report says that there are already huge stresses on overstretched services. They suggest that any return to austerity would be a gift to those who exploit children. And yet we have warnings, of course, from the Chancellor that spending cuts are needed to balance the book. So will the necessary budgets be protected in this spending review?
Well, obviously, we'll need to wait and see what the Chancellor says on the 17th of November. But I would expect, as the Chancellor makes his decisions in the coming weeks, that critical services will get protected. So that's certainly a case I'll be making. But we'll need to wait and see what the Chancellor sets out in his statement in a couple of weeks' time.
OK, what about the other suggestions? The report says that young people and their families should be helped out of poverty, beginning with the uprating of family benefits in line with inflation, ending the 2-child benefit cap and the extension of free school meals to all families receiving universal credit. Given the severity of the situation, will the government commit to that? Well,
let's just think about the action that's been taken already to help families with children and without, particularly on lower incomes. So we've had this energy crisis. Families on lower incomes this year are receiving £1,200 in help. Some of that money is being received this month as we speak. The energy price guarantee is protecting families from bills that could have been as high as £5,000 or £6,000.
OK, but what about these specific cases that the report is asking for?
And when it comes to people on lower incomes, you know, we've significantly increased the minimum wage. It's gone from £5.93 an hour under Labour up to £9.50 now. We've lifted all the tax thresholds, so people on lower earnings pay no income tax and no national insurance whatsoever. So a huge range of measures, particularly designed to help people on lower incomes.
And I'm sure those things are helpful, but what the report is calling for an uprating of family benefits in line with inflation, ending the 2-child benefit cap and the extension of free school meals to all families receiving universal credit. You can't guarantee that will happen.
Well, I can't, because the Chancellor obviously is going to set out his plans on November 17th. He'll have heard that, I'm sure, along with other ideas other people are putting forward as well. And, you know, we'll find out in a couple of weeks what his plans are.
Well, we will indeed, and there's a lot of focus on that. And I want to talk about the economy a little bit, because your old boss, Liz Truss, you worked in the Treasury under her, she said that a recession wasn't inevitable, but we're now looking at the longest recession in a century. And the decisions that you made are partly to blame for that, aren't they?
Well, I think countries around the world are facing enormous economic challenges. It's not just this country, as the Bank of England said yesterday. The European Central Bank have made similar comments. JP Morgan has said the United States of America, the US, has similar challenges. The IMF said 1/3 of global economies are going to be going into recession. So this is a global phenomenon. We're not immune to that.
But the UK has a specific problem, doesn't it? And in fact, asked about whether this meltdown was down to global factors yesterday, the Bank of England Governor, Andrew Bailey, said, I don't really think that's the case. He also has said that he believed that the mini-budget had damaged the UK's standing internationally. You were in the room when the decisions were made about the mini-budget. he's kind of blaming you, isn't he?
Well, the decisions around the mini-budget were made by the former Chancellor and the former
You were in the
Prime Minister.
Treasury team.
Yeah, I was on the Treasury team, that's right. But the decisions, as you would expect, were made by the Chancellor, the previous Chancellor and the previous Prime Minister, who are no longer in post. If you look at the movements to the currency and to government bonds that happened around that time, the negative moves that happened 4 or 5 weeks ago, those numbers have now returned pretty much to the levels they were before. What we now need to do is make sure that we're on an even keel. The new Chancellor is doing that already. And the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is someone who successfully guided our economy through COVID. We came through COVID. We now have the lowest unemployment we've had for 48 years.
That's going to go up, though, according to the Bank of England's projections.
But let's think about where we're starting from. We've got the lowest unemployment for 48 years because Rishi Sunak, as Chancellor, guided us through COVID, and I think he'll guide us through this crisis very well. Also, in terms of GDP growth, last year, not just last year, but also this year, according to the IMF, the UK had the highest GDP growth in the G7, not just last year, but this year as well. So we are starting from a good position, but in common with Western economies, developed economies around the world, there are challenges, but we can meet them.
But a recession for 8 quarters, whatever position you start in, that's a pretty bad place to end up. And Andrew Bailey did say that we were hours from financial meltdown following the mini-budget. Are you quite embarrassed to have been involved in that? Do you have any regrets? Do you feel like you want to apologise?
Well, I think Liz Truss has already apologised, and she's obviously
would you
no longer.
like to? As
well, I say
part
the
of that team?
decisions. Well, although I am, along with other people, was a minister in that government at the time, those decisions were taken principally by the former Prime Minister, to a lesser extent by the former Chancellor, and she has apologised for that, and then neither of them are in office any longer. What I think we're doing now, what Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak are doing, is making sure the country is on an even keel, and in the same way that Rishi guided our economy very successfully through COVID, as I said, we've got the lowest unemployment for 48 years, an incredible achievement. It's half the level that Labour left behind. I think he'll do the same thing through this global crisis that we're entering. And if you think about inflation, that is a global crisis. Eurozone inflation is 10%. In Germany, it's 12%. In Holland, it's 14%. So these are global problems.
OK, let's talk about the UK. You talk about the Chancellor being all about sound public finances. We know that cuts are on the way. There are reports this morning that the new nuclear plant in Suffolk, Sizewell C, is under review. Can you confirm that that's the case?
No, I'm afraid I don't know anything about whether that is or is not under consideration. My job in the Home Office is looking after policing, so I can't comment on that at all. I really just don't know. We'll find out on November 17th what the plans are.
OK, well, a quick question then about capital gains tax. The Telegraph reporting of possible changes. Any indication of the direction they might be looking in?
I'm afraid I just don't know. The Treasury will be making their plans. I don't know what those are, and we'll just have to wait and see what gets announced on the 17th. OK,
well, let's stick to your brief, which is, of course, policing, as you say. Wednesday's damning report found evidence of poor decision-making in police vetting, inconsistent handling of misconduct cases. Your 2019 manifesto set targets, 20,000 police recruitment. Cutting corners to meet those targets?
No, I don't think so. We're on track to meet that target, by the way. We've hired 15,000 of the 20,000, and we're on track to deliver all 20,000 extra police by March of next year, by sort of 4 or 5 months' time. £3.5 billion extra was provided to police forces over that period, the 2019 to 2022 period, when those officers were being recruited, to pay not just for their additional salaries, but also for the support and the infrastructure, including vetting that goes around that, which makes it particularly sort of disappointing that these very serious failings were identified by the inspector's report published a day or two ago. There were 43 recommendations in that report. 3 of those were for the Home Office that we will implement pretty much immediately, or certainly urgently. The other 40 recommendations were for police forces. The NPCC chief, Martin Hewitt, has said they will act on all of those. That is my expectation as police minister. I'm going to work with police to make sure those are implemented as quickly as possible.
OK, let's talk about Manston, shall we? The processing centre in Kent. Can we get an update on the number of people that are in that processing centre now? How many are there and how many have been moved out?
Well, so over 1,000 people have been moved out in the last week or so a substantial number. Since the beginning of September, when the current Home Secretary took office, I think a total of 9,000 people, obviously there's people coming in and out the whole time, 9,000 people have left. I think numbers have very substantially reduced in the course of the last week. and they're investing in creating more facilities there and better facilities to address some of the concerns that have been raised.
But where are they gone? I mean, we've got reports of a second group of migrants left stranded at Victoria Coach Station.
Well, they've mostly gone to hotels. There are about 4,500 extra hotels have been procured.
But what about these people that have been stranded at Victoria Coach Station?
Yeah, so
Why has that happened?
There are two groups of people, and what I've been told by the people on the immigration side of the Home Office is that both groups of people had told immigration officials at Manston they had addresses to go to, so friends and family. Obviously, that turned out subsequently not to be the case, but the information that Home Office officials had understood was they had places to go to, because many of the people do have friends and family in the UK already.
So this was a mistake?
Yeah, well, clearly that understanding was not accurate. Quite how that misunderstanding arose, maybe it was lost in translation, I don't know. But clearly they have now all been looked after. OK,
as a former immigration compliance minister, do you accept that Manston is not legally compliant now?
I'm not sure I do accept that. Significant improvements have been made recently. We had similar challenges over the Napier site in Folkestone, and we made improvements there to make it compliant. So, but we should keep in mind that there is a huge challenge we've got here. About 40,000 people so far have illegally entered the UK so far this year on small boats. And that is a huge operational challenge. It's very, very hard to deal with that. Now, these journeys are totally unnecessary because France, obviously, is a safe country with a well-functioning asylum system. These journeys don't need to be made. No one is fleeing war in France. So these journeys should not be getting made in the first place.
Well, many people would argue they need more legal routes to come in, and
let's
many
talk about
of these are
that.
Asylum seekers.
That's right. So first of all, France has a well-functioning asylum system. Secondly, the predominant nationality, the largest single nationality is Albanian. Albania is a safe and civilised country. You don't need to leave Albania for your safety. It's a safe country. In terms of safe and legal routes, we have a lot of safe and legal routes. Let me give you a couple of examples. We've taken 150,000 Ukrainians, 20,000 Syrians when there was the war there, 23,000 Afghans, over 100,000 people from Hong Kong fleeing the Chinese Communist Party. We have a lot of safe and legal routes. We've been very generous to people who are in genuine need, the groups I've just mentioned being prime examples of that. What we can't accept, and frankly can't even handle operationally, because the numbers are so large, are people making these dangerous and unnecessary journeys across the Channel from France, a safe country. And that is why quite radical action is needed legislatively to make sure that our international treaty obligations aren't being domestically interpreted or applied in a way that makes it impossible to run our immigration system.
Lots of arguments that we will have to have another time, or conversation to have another time, but I do want to just come back to this question of whether or not Manston is legally compliant. Robert Jenrick, your colleague, told Sky News this week he expected Manston to be returned to a well-functioning and legally compliant site very rapidly.
That's
the implication being that it's not currently legally compliant.
Well, a lot of changes have been made in the course of this week. I think Robert has been down there at least once and possibly twice. I think he's going down again on Sunday. So significant changes and improvements have been made.
So how soon will it be before it's legally compliant?
Well, I don't accept the premise that it's not legally compliant today. A lot of changes have been made, even in the last few days, since you spoke to Robert on this chair, I think, a few days ago.